Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast brought to you by Joint Flows. Today, we have been joined by Steve Evans, the CEO and founder of the Transformation Club. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am well, very well. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us. Really looking forward to this conversation. We always start at the same point, which is a little bit of a brief introduction. Who is Steve Evans? How have you got to where you've got to today?
Yeah, great. And again, thanks for having me on the podcast today. So who is Steve Evans and who are the Transformation Club? I guess it's a fairly short story for me in that over a decade ago, coming back from Tokyo in Japan from a previous role in industry in accountancy, I decided to take my hand and learn the sales craft as a junior salesperson. Started as a trainee at a local Bristol-based event company called GDS, and wanted to hone my craft and learn about business from a sales perspective. I actually found an ad in the newspaper, local newspaper, literally called the number, went in for a few interviews, jumped up and down on a large sales floor to impress the recruitment management, and started my journey there. Started very poorly, actually. When I started there, I barely made it out of the what at the time was a 6-week induction period, where you must sell and earn business in that period. And I was a little slower, a little less persuasive back then, I guess, than the current climate would have liked. But actually ended up spending over a decade there with a really great group, working closely with their founder, and leaving there a couple of years back before the brainchild of the Transformation Club, which is, I guess, an evolution of that. We're currently building meaningful engagements for the C levels in the enterprise that are looking to be in person together and really problem solve, which nicely allows us to help the SaaS companies in tech world drive revenue by being in front of their top prospects.
Awesome. And why are people struggling to do that independently? What's blocking me from being able to do that without the Transformation Club?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think as sales leaders and former or current sales execs, we will probably feel and really resonate with some of the key stats that are thrown around today. But I think it's Forbes that had mentioned that 82% of executives and business leaders form deeper relationships and foster better connections when they're in person, but also groups with executives. I think we've all heard the phrase of being sat across the sales room or being client side, right? And that's sometimes very hard to do at the C level. When you are a salesperson, you are knocking on the door. You might be a junior SDR or someone mid-level, but it is really hard if you have that sales hat on that ulterior motive. And so we've really found that if we can foster those relationships in groups together when you're all solving a common challenge, naturally that means that people become more receptive and open to sharing ideas, or their truer ideas and concerns and pain points.
This is, I think it's a really good idea. And Hits and I have been working together for years. If we can take a meeting face to face, we would always do it, even if the meeting is very far away. Like we would invest in the traveling time to create a little bit of rapport. How much do you think in sales, how important is it in sales to have that direct report with someone versus something a little bit more digital, where you probably you've never met the person in real life? Is it a big lever?
Yeah, we do. We see a fundamental shift in being in person with executives. I guess going back to my time at GDS, I mean, that was the premise of the business that was set up there maybe 30 years ago now, right? Is that face-to-face accelerates business. It does. You might be able to have some elements of rapport when you're looking at a 3 by 5 centimeter window of somebody, right? You might get a little bit of an insight into their dog's name or kind of what the weather looks like in the background. And it doesn't really extend beyond that. But when you are in person with somebody and you can take your business hat off and you can have a drink with them or share a meal with them, I think the world's always a kinder place, right? When you're sharing food, for example. So I just think it's fundamentally better to initially build a relationship with somebody, be that, as you said, Mick, in a sales meeting, or outside of that, before you're even getting to that case where you're fostering relationships with people that you generally know you can help solve, or generally have challenges that you're there to help contribute towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel like it's better to have both. And I don't know, some people might think it's overstepping the boundary, but both a professional and a social relationship with your prospect. So, i.e., like if I can, I'd go to the pub with them, I'd have a meal with them, grab a coffee with them, not endorsing alcohol here, so whatever floats anyone's boat. But just anything to build some kind of relationship. And you often just find that actually, you know what, everyone's just human. They just want to buy. At the end of the day, it's people buy off people, right? And so they need to be able to like who they're doing work with. I remember an old manager of mine said, you know, if they don't like you, they're not going to buy off you, right? So be likable in the first instance. Don't be hard to work with. Be easy to work with as well. So that goes a long way for sure.
Yeah,
Sorry.
couldn't agree more with that. I think a phrase that one of my old managers would use for the events that we would put on previously would be a bit like a stag do or a hen do, but for businesses. So we would bring people together literally to eat, sleep, live, and workshop and run challenges for maybe 2.5 days. And you would have maybe 150 of you at the type of events that we would run. But one thing would be certain is by the end of those 2.5 days, just like on a stag do, you've met people that you just never thought you would form a connection with, that you do, you really gel with, and you trust. We can move on to trust later. It's probably a big talking point in sales, right? But you really trust those people that you just met 2 days ago, that you might have thought were nowhere near a match for you in any respect. And equally, there'll be on paper companies or people that just tick all the boxes and you would expect to be a perfect customer vendor relationship, whatever it might be. And actually over those 2.5 days, you just find out that it's not quite right. And I think relationships are at the heart of that, right? And so that's carried through with me, certainly, as I've moved on to forming the Transformation Club. But yeah, I'm not sure we should all be spending 2.5 days together when we're assessing vendors, but it was certainly a good way to accelerate that maybe 50 years ago.
Steve, so you're putting a lot of high value kind of like big names in the same room together, and like I feel like sometimes, you know, they put on a face with like, oh, you know, in terms of confidentiality, and they're playing a role as well in terms of being like representing the company. When do you feel they start dropping their guard a little bit and opening up more during your events? Is there a trick you use to be like, all right, guys, we're all in the same, we're all going to the toilet here. Like, let's open up a bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we're all human, right? So it's so hard to try and engineer. And that's what we do, right? We are engineers of experiences. We're trying to design and engineer experiences that foster and accelerate trust for one another in the room, as you mentioned there, and trust between any type of tech or service, whoever it might be, that can genuinely hold their hand along their difficult and continuously changing transformation journey. I guess, to be direct, it's when one person opens up, right? And so it's how do we get that first person? Because we all know and hear of the second follower being kind of like fundamental in big change and disruption. But that second follower doesn't come until there's one clearly, right, that starts that. So like having clients, and if we're talking specifically around events, having clients or having proven peers in the room that can generally open up first and be vulnerable goes a really long way for us. So yeah, 9 times out of 10, if one person says, hey, I've messed up here, or we've done this wrong, or I'm really concerned about this, there's 9 or 10 in the room that have the exact same thoughts, but they're thinking, right, I don't want to be the first person to say we might be messing up, or that we don't feel that we have our ducks in a row. And so yeah, it's getting that first person in however you can, and hopefully having that ready to share confidently at the start is key for us.
Yeah. Is it fair to say at these events, not everybody's in buying mode? So there's a strong emphasis on building a relationship with somebody, building trust, but not necessarily trust for someone buying something off somebody in the near term. Is that a fair assessment, or is it typically the other way around where it's intent based only?
Yeah, so you're right. 9 times out of 10, like the majority of what we run at the moment, yeah, is that let's build a challenge-based session around execs that acknowledge that this is a genuine concern for them right now. So in no way are they sales qualified. In no way are they at this stage are we trying to start that journey. The onus is on them being in a room so that they can be vulnerable and trust their peers and whoever is there representing the solution, if you like, or solution is there doing so in the right manner. That yeah, it's there to, as we said, foster and provoke thought to start with, and almost not just solve a problem, but find the best problems to solve. I hear this.
Yeah.
I hear this 3 times out of 10 at the moment already. It's not just, especially with the use of continued use of AI and large language models, right? You can technically solve problems really quick, but how are you finding the right problems to solve? And being privy to those type of conversations in groups with your top or anybody's top prospects is the real value of what we start. What happens from there is pretty magical, because then naturally, if you've shown up in the right way, you've represented, you've provoked fault, irrespective of the initial intent, which I'd love to touch upon in a moment, but irrespective of that intent without action, or have they clicked on stuff or looked online at bits, etc. If you're building a relationship and you're provoking fault, you're probably finding deeper problems than the surface level that the intent might show.
Yeah.
And then from there, I mean, we average just shy of 2/3, 65% of this is since starting 18 months ago, 65% of any attendee at one of our focused sessions like this opt for a follow-up meeting one-on-one with solution providers. And I think that's testament because we're not trying to promise sales qualified ops, try and qualify people before they've come in the room and met with them and all of that great stuff that, again, it's really difficult for an SDR or a kind of like a sales junior to start to do, and difficult in the way that you may be able to achieve it, but you might be putting the relationship again across a sales desk as opposed to a kind of a communal conversation.
Yeah. That leads me to my next question, which is, if this is the case, which I think is great because it's genuine relationships that are being built, at the end of the day, though, everyone's still part of who are coming to your events are trying to hit a sales number. So what do you see work well for these individuals in terms of them nurturing that relationship to the point where when they are in buying mode or research mode, that's the person they're going to reach out to?
Yes, again, that's I wouldn't say a challenge. That's an exciting part of the role that if you're Oracle, for example, we work on what we call a whispering circle, or many other companies where you want to show up as a kind of a force, a central force where they can come back to you and almost drop in, right, with the questions and the kind of the concerns that they have. What I would say is typically, so we don't really mass market the activities that we run. And most companies that we work with, the research is done prior. So if you have an ABM strategy or key target account list, and you know that through our initial research, we have indication of suspicion that these will have a challenge or will be ideal for us and probably going through some of these pains, then we're there to soft vet that and bring those in. So yeah, a typical company working with the club from a solution point of view would drop in their ABM or their towers for us that are like their top groups that they're otherwise struggling to reach. And so they're in some way confident that any execs that are passing through the door and meeting with them are on that ideal profile for them. I guess then the repetition for us, or being consistent, showing up as we would as sales guys anyway, right? Is key there. It's not just running a one-off event, maybe running something like you guys do with the pipelines and pipes, right? It's really about showing up and giving back and being there consistently enough so that as and when they are ready, you are front of mind.
You said something that kind of put some perspective to me on tenure. So we sell to salespeople, and the tenure in sales plus sales leadership is crazy low. Like, so average tenure of a rep is 18 months. VP level is 19, I think. And most sales cycles, enterprise level, last longer than the tenure. to give you a little bit of perspective, the
Yeah.
person doesn't see it end to end. Like that person doesn't see the deal he started all the way to the finish line. And I guess it's the same at leadership level, perhaps a little bit longer, but it's a bet to fixing the right problem as quickly as possible. And from your experience, Steve, the successful execs, leaders, do they have a framework to identify those problems early on to then focus the initiatives on those? Is there a pattern there?
Yeah, I mean, so spot on. I mean, the research that we've done 5 years ago would have said almost the same numbers you're talking about for the C-suite as well, right? Across most lines of business, like an 18-month tenure in an enterprise account with a sales cycle, if you're talking any type of transformational project being like 2 to 3 years, right? And so you've got execs coming in with a list of projects that someone else has set up and priorities that someone set up. They want to come in, they need to finish those off. They have to make an impact themselves, and they have to do it quickly so that they last more than the 18-month average, right? And I think it's probably a little longer now at the C-suite, but the premise is still exactly the same. And at this stage, no is the short answer, and that's why we're here, right? Because if there was a proven framework that we see or we're aware that we could kind of go out and consult and advise, that would be fantastic. But I think it's generally around, with the pace of change being so quick and ever increasing, it's like, how do you outsmart that? How do you outpace the speed of change? And how do you stay relevant? And that's probably by not sitting in your own four walls, and learning and staying with the same culture that you've had. Is by getting out there and being amongst peers and working on those challenges together. I think one thing that from a slightly, I guess, less progressed level that I've seen working really well is digital sales rooms, right? And being able to have a constant place where any type of challenge, exec statements, all the pains can be summarized neatly. And then whether or not people are dropping in or off or changing, and the sales cycles are getting kind of larger and larger in terms of democratic buying committees, right? Having kind of a central place for us just to keep track and account is one way that we can combat. But in terms of execs coming in on day one, I think they've got just a busy runway to start running on, right? And yeah, it's a difficult challenge, which is I don't see going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, I think it's going to get a lot worse in terms of the pressure and the timescales for execs, and that they need to continuously disrupt themselves.
And as you said, like AI can sort of make it even harder for them, because the expectation is that the problems will be solved faster than before. Do you know, like, why have we got to this point of you don't stay in a job more than 2 years? It's just, oh, if you do, then it's exception, it's out of the ordinary. Like, to me, it sounds crazy that, you know, my parents, my mom's been in the same job for the entirety of her life, and she's a teacher, so you know she's not gonna become a different type of, but she's been in the same school for 35 years, and it's kind of the norm back then. But today it's like, if you're tenured, extremely experienced salesperson, if you stay there for more than 18 or a year and a half, you're top level. How did we get there?
Yeah, it's a crazy world, right? And I think it is, again, like, technology is changing faster and faster and speeding the pace of change. And with that, it seems to become everything else. People are becoming more impatient, and they want faster results. They want faster ROI. They want faster everything, right? And sometimes it's not always the case, right? I think, in fact, I saw a post just this morning from Mr. Musk, Elon Musk, talking about Grok and their the amount of change that they've made over the last 6 months compared to all other generative AI platforms. And I think the amount of releases and updates that they've made is like tenfold compared to everything else, ChatGPT included. And the majority of the comments that I saw, which hopefully are pleasing to this conversation, were around the alarm bells that rings, that if you need to if you've had to change that many times and release that many updates, either your direction was slightly off to start with, or your product team probably aren't its best place, right? Because what we need to be focusing on is that kind of North Star and the common goal that people are all wanting to achieve in various different levels, right? And in various different places. And it's such a hard one and a long-winded way of saying I have no idea why we're moving around so much. But no, it fills me with confidence when we are speaking to execs that have been in a role more than that threshold of 18 months and are there really making change, and they have a team above them and around them that can all work together, right? And achieve that goal together.
Yeah. I find it either goes in one of two ways, which is you stay there for a really long time, which is typically how my career pans out. Or you're chasing, as you know, people chase money. So it's you know, if you like it or not, but it's easier to get, and I think it's statistically proven as well. There's been lots of research to back this up, but it's easier to move from one pay bandwidth to the other by moving job as it is by staying in your current role, unless you hold the cards, in which case you can negotiate aggressively internally, which some people have done, maybe on this call as well. But that's basically that's essentially where it stems down to. But what I wanted to circle back on was the event front, Steve. So is there a particular, because you host different types of events, right, in terms of the actual activity that's taking place and things that people are doing during these events. Is there a particular type of setting or activity that you think drives more openness and drives people to connect faster than others?
Yeah, there is. And unfortunately, at this stage, it's not practice as much as we would like it to, because I think it does take a lot of time, effort, and investment up front to really do well. But what we have been doing with some of our larger clients at Dell, Intel, Microsoft, for example, is really focus on the immersive activities in person with executives. Be that one example that I'd love to share is kind of dressing everybody up in lab coats and having kind of an immersive actor team with you. So you're bringing in IT leaders from all over, and they're expecting a day of solving challenges with you. Not really 100% sure on what that means, and they're expecting the norm. You come in, you're all in suits, and you shake hands, and you'll eat together and just sit down and chat. But actually, we brought over Jeffrey Moore, Silicon Valley author you've probably heard of, right? Zones to Win and Chasm.
Yeah.
And using his framework, we would have actors separate all the businesses and really focus on almost role play in terms of, right, there is a disease in your business and we need to diagnose the problem so that we can use the framework, right, to ensure that you can disrupt effectively and not be a blockbuster in the world of Netflix type scenario. And those type of immersive activities do a couple of things. The obvious, they're memorable, and they're gonna remember you. And the team and the people that they built relationships with and shared a laugh with, right? You don't remember what was spoken about often at events, but you remember how people make you feel, the obvious kind of analogy. But two, it gets people thinking more, right? You're in and you jump in more. So to your point, Mick, around how do we get people to participate and be vulnerable or actually engage in their challenge and open up about their challenges. So I mean, if you're there and we're running around and there's chemistry bottles being smashed on the floor and everyone's in white lab coats and there's a real fun environment to that, and you're still sat with, you might be sat next to the CIO of Coca-Cola or whoever it might be, CIO of Oldham Council. So you're a group of traditionally very serious people, but actually you're compelled now to open up and talk about your genuine challenges, because you can almost see the results happening right there in front of you. Then they're the ones that we live for at the club. They work, as I said, they're not a cheap activity and they need to be well planned and thought out. But those type of activities where you can be remembered beyond the room is that our micro team is not quite an agency yet, but it's called Beyond the Room, which is our fractional creative team. Build those type of experiences, but they're the ones, if you can be immersive, you can layer in the right environment with the right people, that's fantastic. And you can have great conversation and that works all day long, bread and butter. But if you can build something that extends that memory far, far beyond the time that you're with them, then you're really winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the challenge? Because you said it's more challenging to set these type of events up. What is it that makes that harder than a traditional event?
So it just the planning and preparation, right, for these activities are often led down to logistics. So you might be, because we're working with busy, time-pressed individuals at the end of the day.
Mm.
So if you're working with and you're looking at enterprise C-levels that might have a global schedule or a pan-European schedule, they're in and out, they're not always designed to be there on that one, also not always available to be there on that one particular day or those couple of days that you might situate this across a 6-month period, right? And so there's a lot of time and thought can go into these activities, a lot of creativeness around how we interrupt or get in front of them to invite them to these activities can all be put together. But ultimately, nobody wants to be spending £250,000 flying Jeffrey Moore over, and the same on an extravagant activity for 100 CIOs if the reality is only 50 of them are showing up because they've got flights elsewhere. So there's always, again, circles back to trust, I guess, in baby steps and working with companies so that they can really find the pattern and working with their core target market. You do get a feel and you build a community, micro community of execs where you can start to plan these out in advance. But I guess, yeah, for us, it's early doors, 18 months in with a handful of clients under our belts. What we don't see happening is many companies off the bat saying, yeah, let's run full whack with an immersive activity. Not as many as we'd like anyway.
Sounds fun though. It sounds fun for sure.
Yeah, I think I really love it. The best experience I've had on the corporate side in terms of team building and sharing and creating networks was when we were doing some role playing on something completely different. So there was a company who came in and they gave us something to solve, which was you needed to build a structure with pieces of wood and things like that, and you could only use your left hand or something, like some crazy constraints, and only one person could report back the results. So you had to agree on what needed to be done. Only one person could touch the structure. So it has to be, you had to communicate well. And the memories we kept from it was just incredible. Like to this day, we still speak about it. I remember when you forgot to turn that piece of wood. It was the ultimate answer to the problem. How, like, if you were to advise companies like ourselves on how to run or how to think about this kind of activities, what would the advice be? Like,
Yes, look, we would urge anybody to focus on the challenge that you're solving, obviously, right? Make sure you're really invested there and have that first leader in the room with you, the first problem solver, be it a customer or a peer that you know, but have somebody that's not you vocally shouting about that challenge, that you can generally then spend time being there to help solve. So the events are always set up with a cost attached, which means there's a return that you're all expecting, right? And be that internally or with third parties. I think understanding realistically what that looks like for you and what you're looking to achieve goes a long way. But if we could focus on, for us, just having that first follower in the room that can shout about that challenge and encourage others to open up seems to be the winning piece of advice for me.
yeah, it's great. And in terms of thinking about the actual activity, to say, okay, well, I don't want to run a webinar, I don't want to do an email campaign. What an ABM is a little bit complex often because it's very technological. I find it's, hey, have you got this workflow? Have we got this account research done, or how do we mix that? And this is going back to actual, like, let's just connect. Like, how do you switch? How do you bring this to the table? Like, what's the best way for you to qualify an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, so it all comes down, I guess, to people at the moment. We're obsessed with, or salespeople at least, more meeting. Well, in fact, marketeers as well, right? We sit between marketing and sales quite neatly because marketing buy from us, and they do so to support their sales teams because they're increasingly aligned and having increasingly a number attach them for pipeline generation and engagement at the right level. And often there has been a disconnect over many years. Do you know what I mean? There's always been the case. But I think that if you can focus on really bringing a good presence to an activity where you are focused on, as we said, just solving challenges for those executives, I just don't see how you can be far off. So when we approach typical companies, majority of them do have complex ABM programs. It might be one to few or one to many, but often by the time they've agreed to work with us and we sit with them and their sales teams, it's a case of, as I was about to say, people just want more and more meetings. The higher number of meetings often results in, for them, higher results. But we challenge companies really to focus on making the meetings or the engagements that you have more meaningful, more relevant, and a better experience for executives. And so I'm not sure if that's a disagreement or not.
I don't know where that came from.
yeah, definitely unhappy with what I'm saying, but that's we would focus on with a lot of companies. And then often when we break it down, if we can sit alongside and be almost an extension of people's sales teams, right, sales and marketing efforts, we're here to uncover those top level relationships where genuinely at the C-level they're scratching their head, and you can show up well and hold their hand, and that becomes more of a metric or a tick box for us than it does in terms of, right, what is the volume of meetings that happen, and that's kind of typically where we sit at the moment.
Yeah, you said something there I just wanted to double click on. So you mentioned people want more, right? They want more meetings, and you challenge that and say, well, you want more quality meetings, you want more meetings with the right people, which I think is fair, and I think it's where we should be going. But you're in a privileged position where you get to, when you speak to your prospects or your customers, you're speaking to marketing teams. And you also mentioned, traditionally there's kind of a conflict in terms of, I guess, attribution, where did this lead come from? And marketing are now being more and more challenged with more definitive outputs, so more definitive results, like you need to generate X amount of revenue, right? And so all of a sudden, that SDR function, and I know there's a term all bound, everyone's working together, but everybody works in this way, becomes challenged, right? There's competing priorities between the sales team and the marketing team in terms of who's going to recognize what revenue, at least at that level. Are you exposed much to this, and how are you seeing people or your prospects or customers collaborate better across department for this?
Yeah, we see this day in and day out. And in fact, I think we were 15 years ago when I first started, it was a kind of a big talking point for the chairman at the time at GDS, particularly with companies like IBM, right? And then the introduction of like a kind of a BANT framework whenever that was introduced, and having a lot of red tape between opportunities being passed off from marketing into sales. One of the reasons what there was a product line that they'd set up for virtual activities, just so that you can physically record the conversations for a company at that scale, right? And actually make sure you've got the red tape. But ultimately, yeah, what I've, with the growing role and function of go-to-market, right? And seeing kind of pure go-to-market leaders crop up, and seeing more and more marketing teams starting to sit under CROs. I see hope of alignment there, but often I guess there's never just one opportunity that's created right within an account. Often, as we said, it's multi-threaded. Often there's, God, you guys will tell me more how many touch points are needed in a typical SaaS sales cycle, right? They are multi-threaded, and so what we can do is position multiple goals along that cycle with companies. But typically it's a case of having to work with divisions cohesively. They want to. I'm not, and the club or anything that we do, or even you guys, right, are going to persuade the mindsets, in my opinion, of companies that aren't working in that way and aren't aligned until it's too late and they start to fall behind or start to fail or lose pace against others that are. And so for us, it's not a case of being able to guide probably the right word. We can guide, but we can't really change opinions there. What we can do is make sure that when we're fishing, the only bites that we're getting are from people that want to be aligned or want to be more focused. And we are seeing that. We're seeing that a lot more with so many companies now that well, to start with, a lot of our kickoff calls include both divisions, which wouldn't have happened
Nice.
maybe up to 2 years ago. Never ever would we have both revenue or sales and marketing on the same case of calls, like compiling lists together of top accounts or not even accounts, drivers. What circumstances or issues might our top prospects have that we cohesively want to address on this challenge? And then that becomes less of a, as we were saying, it's less of is it an MQL that's being passed across as an accepted lead? Has it been generated by SDR that sits in sales versus your email campaign that's gone out? We seem to be way away from that and just focused on, right, can we touch as many of the businesses that you really want to as possible, like you said, with the right execs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, we are coming up to the top end of the episode, but thank you for sharing all the insights that you have. We do have somewhat of a closing tradition on here, which you might be familiar with, because it's a copy and paste of the Diary of CEO. Spoiler. So the question, the question that you've been left by our last guest is, in 3 years from now, what would you have needed to achieve personally and professionally to say that you had been successful? And then when you're done answering that, you will then tell us a question that we can ask our next guest.
Yeah, what a question. Genuinely wasn't expecting that. But I mean, what would I need to see to achieve
in the next 3 years?
In 3 years? I mean, for me, it's pretty simple, right? We want to see on a professional front, as many companies singing the praises from an enterprise and a tech perspective about the club, and that we're being a genuine support mechanism for those executives. There's a crazy goal for us, and when we first started, we were like, right, we want to be bought by Microsoft. We want to compete with LinkedIn. We don't like LinkedIn. Let's be an in-person version that might then translate to a place where genuine C-levels hang out. And I think we're somewhat navigating away from that. In the moment, that's not necessarily the goal. So 3 years professionally, yeah, I mean, if we have 1,000 happy customers, then that's a great goal for us. And on the private front, it's even more simple than that. We're expecting, as I said, a new baby girl into the family on New Year's Eve this year. So happy and healthy. That's yeah, rounding off the family, hopefully for us. So yeah, a nice, fairly large family now. As long as she's happy and healthy, then you'll see a big success and smile from me.
Amazing. Awesome. And then your question, what would you like to know from our next guest?
What would I like to know from your next guest? Yeah, that's more difficult than I thought, but I guess to keep it along the same lines, I would want to know from this person where they think sales is heading. So specifically, a question from me would be, what do you think a typical sales cycle would look like in 3 years' time?
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, brought to you by Joint Flows. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.